I was raised in a small settlement barely marked on any map, nestled where the Appalachian ridges loomed tight and mist clung stubbornly to the winding paths. Folks in those parts kept to themselves, probed too deeply about isolated valleys or run-down dwellings, and the elders would simply nod solemnly, advising you to take the longer route. That ought to have been my initial clue, but it only sparked my interest. The dwelling that nearly destroyed me was the sort everyone acted like they couldn't spot. Perched midway up a hillside along a rutted dirt lane, it was engulfed by foliage that arched toward it deliberately. As a boy, bouncing in the bed of my dad's pickup, I'd glimpse its silhouette peeking through the limbs, like a shadow in the corner of your eye that you dismiss as a trick of the mind. By the time I could handle a wheel myself, I'd memorized its outline without ever approaching it up close. It was my buddy William who finally dared me to check it out. Armed with a bargain bin camcorder, endless idle hours, and an obsession for forsaken spots that unsettled the group, he figured it was prime for footage. He dreamed of launching an online series, capturing genuine Appalachian ruin, highlighting the vacant structures forsaken after the collieries shuttered and factories ground to a halt. I warned him that such sites weren't truly deserted around these parts. A derelict home could shelter drifters, addicts, or folks dodging any legal ties. He brushed it off with a chuckle, insisting we'd slip in and slip out unnoticed. We chose a dreary November day for the trek, with clouds pressing down and the gloom suggesting dawn had never truly broken. The entry path, choked with lichen and fallen foliage, had mostly vanished, though the grooves lingered like wounds in the soil. Down at the base stood a corroded postbox, its surname scrubbed away, leaving just a ghostly outline of vanished script. The building crouched atop the incline, a pair of levels high, its veranda drooping, panes dark and vacant. A sapling had thrust upward through the entry stairs, fracturing the planks as if the terrain were gradually reclaiming it. Stepping from the vehicle, the silence struck me immediately. No avian calls, no buzzing bugs, no far-off hounds from neighboring farms. Just a soft whisper of breeze, rustling naked twigs. The sort of hush that hints at an unseen watcher. William hoisted his lens and began recording, muttering commentary as if rehearsing for viewers. I stayed silent, eyeing the structure while assuring myself the tightness in my ribs was merely the cold. The main entrance was secured, but the lateral one near the presumed cooking area dangled ajar, warped by moisture and decades of abandonment. We shouldered it inward to gain entry. The odor assaulted me right away. Mildew, stale tobacco, damp timber, and a sharp, acrid tang beneath that clawed at my palate. Faint shafts of pale light pierced the shattered glass, revealing swirling particles and tattered webs suspended from above like frayed drapes. "Check this out," William murmured, panning his device over the space. All abandoned, as if the owners planned a quick return. He had a point. The prep area retained dishes piled on the surface, a vessel on the burner, and a wall-hung schedule frozen on a June from over 10 years past. A plastic kid's cup tipped over on the tabletop, its cartoon face eroded halfway off. It struck me as off-kilter, as if we'd stumbled into somebody's existence right in the middle of a thought. We proceeded with caution, the floorboards protesting beneath our steps. In the sitting area, a sofa sagged facing a lifeless TV set, with a knitted throw neatly draped across one armrest. The walls brimmed with family snapshots, a pair on their wedding day, children proudly displaying catches from a murky pond. Everyone gathered before a holiday pine. I paused before one image capturing the household on the very porch we'd entered, the building looking whole and vibrant in the background. It showed Mom and Dad with a son and daughter. The boy appeared around 12, his stare locked directly into the lens, face devoid of emotion, irises unnaturally shadowed. "Kinda eerie, huh?" William murmured from behind, peering past me through his camera. It was almost as if the family had sensed the house's dark secret, even in those happier times. I gave a non-committal lift of my shoulders, though the kids' unblinking eyes tracked my retreat, sending chills across my skin. We pressed further inside. The corridor held additional pictures, more snippets from their past. First school mornings, a pet in a yard long gone. At the corridor's far end rose a tight stairway, its treads hollowed at the center from countless traversals. The idea of ascending filled me with dread, though I couldn't pinpoint the reason. The upper level didn't seem markedly altered, yet some deep-seated instinct, echoing my grandma's tales of haunted dwellings, urged me to resist, steady and insistent. Naturally, William made a beeline for the steps. "Hang back if you're not up for it," he tossed over his shoulder. "I'm curious about the sleeping quarters." Reluctantly, I trailed after him, convincing myself it was better than letting him venture solo while I lingered below, ears straining. The risers groaned as we climbed, and midway a chill hit abruptly, not the slow seep of an aged, uninsulated home, but a piercing frost that clouded my exhales. I chafed my arms and pushed onward. The upstairs passage felt more confined, the overhead beams dipping closer. Doors flanked either wall, a few ajar, others closed. We entered the nearest sleeping space. It was compact, with wallpaper curling away in strips of washed-out blooms. Beneath the pane sat a single bed, its padding depressed, while a cluster of plush toys lay shrouded in grime at the base. Beside it, on the side table, stood a light fixture and a tiny porcelain box mimicking a cottage designed to chime tunes. "Take a look at this," William remarked, lifting it. "Reckon it's functional?" "Don't," I began, but he'd already wound the mechanism on its underside. It resisted briefly before emitting a frail, distorted melody, dragging sluggish and mistuned. The noise twisted my gut. It permeated the space, then bled into the corridor outside, reverberating a split instant delayed, as though duplicated. That's when the footfalls registered. Soft at first, like unshod steps from someone hidden nearby. Timbers shifting in a far-off chamber, then nearer, halting abruptly. William went rigid, the box clutched in his grip. The melody persisted. "Catch that?" he breathed. I dipped my head. The steps resumed, now from directly above, despite the absence of any upper story, just the sloped roofline. Deliberate paces spanned the building's width, passing straight overhead. Fine particles drifted from above with every dull thump. _quote_8_. William whispered. I'd scoped the exterior earlier. No extra story, no gables, no entry points we'd spotted. I stayed silent, Edging to the threshold, I scanned the passage. Deserted, yet the box's output altered in the open air, overlaid with a faint undertone, as if another presence murmured harmony, slightly askew. "Kill it," I instructed. He attempted to, but the winding knob refused to yield. The ditty ground forward, mangling pitches. The underlying murmur swelled, sharpening into clarity. A female timbre, deep and atonal, struggling to recall the rhythm without success. I retreated into the chamber to repeat my plea, and suddenly the murmur ceased. The box droned on alone, the added layer vanishing mid-inhalation, like an abrupt silencing. Then, from our rear, a woman's tone rang out, sharp and intimate, as if she'd materialized in the entry we'd crossed moments before. "Quote 10, it uttered. My companion flinched as from a strike. Only his mom ever used his given name. The delivery mirrored hers precisely, rhythm identical, faint lilt intact. Briefly, I figured we'd been tailed, bracing for a local's scolding of foolish intruders. I whirled. The passage remained vacant. Quote 11 I queried. He negated with a frantic shake, gaze bulging. The voice returned nearer now, brushing his left side. Quote 12. He let the box slip. It crashed to the boards and splintered, the melody severed on a sour chord. The quiet that came after felt even more unbearable than the melody itself. My breaths came out uneven and echoing in my ears. His body trembled visibly. Quote 13, he rasped out. Quote 14. Words failed me completely in response. Further along the corridor, an untouched door began to ease open with a deliberate slowness, accompanied by the grating scrape of timber rubbing on warped timber. A subtle change stirred in the atmosphere, carrying the subtle aroma of cigarette smoke, the very same type his mother had puffed through endlessly while lounging on their front porch. That scent was familiar to me. I'd lingered in its haze for most of my teenage years. "All right," I whispered, my words scarcely audible. "We're getting out of here." We retreated from the space, always keeping the deserted corridor in our sights without fully exposing our backs. When we neared the now open doorway, I couldn't resist glancing inside. It turned out to be yet another sleeping area, its walls lined with additional snapshots of family life. In every image, the young man with those piercing dark eyes appeared slightly more grown, a bit more upright, his face remaining devoid of emotion. It wasn't until the final picture that a difference emerged. The edges of his lips curved upward in what seemed like a grin, but it never touched his gaze. And caught in the glassy overlay protecting the photo, I noticed two outlines absent from the actual scene, one elongated, the other more compact, mirroring our own forms as we peered through from our current spot. I blinked, and the image in the glass altered. Just for an instant, it wasn't our reflections staring back. The larger silhouette had its head angled in my direction. Details blurred, yet the contour of the hair, the hunch of the posture, they didn't align. It resembled the presence of another figure positioned uncomfortably near, right at my rear. I avoided turning around to verify. Instead, I seized William's arm and hauled him swiftly toward the lower level. Upon reaching the base, the structure seemed to sigh. An extended deep rumble emanated from the framework, carrying a sense of either release or regret. I couldn't distinguish. The main entrance, previously secured from the exterior, now hung partially ajar, permitting a narrow beam of dull morning light to seep through. We didn't pause to wonder why. We bolted into the open air. The hush shattered then. Avian calls filled the space. A canine's bark echoed from a distance. Somewhere past the woodland, a vehicle downshifted on the distant roadway. Those everyday noises rang out intensely after the stifled atmosphere indoors. Conversation waited until we'd returned to the vehicle, with the door secured and the motor humming. Quote 17. I eventually inquired. He glanced at the recorder as if he'd momentarily lost track of it in his grip. Tremors still coursed through his fingers. He pressed play. The display captured the cooking area, the sitting space, snippets of our uneasy chuckles during the tour, followed by interference, a dense veil of static, from our initial step on the staircase until the device recorded our hurried exit through the entryway. Amid the distortion, a single audio pierced through distinctly, a female voice crooning a fractured melody, pressed close to the lens. He never shared that recording online. He erased it later that evening, or so he assumed. Some time afterward, he confessed to me that the voice lingers in his mind at times, especially as sleep approaches, murmuring his name with identical inflection. Upon re-examining the storage chip, the recordings had vanished. The capacity they once occupied remained unallocated, as if the dwelling had retained its version and had no intention of returning ours. These days, I opt for the extended route every time. I'll tack on 10 extra minutes to any journey simply to steer clear of that path. The structure endures up on the hill, warped and fractured amid the foliage. Locals claim that in these hills, nothing ever fully perishes. Since that experience, I've come to agree. Certain elements merely linger in wait, attuned to sounds, until someone reckless enough ventures within to refresh their memory of your identity. Folks around here often remark that the peaks hold on to every detail. It's delivered as a caution, typically whenever a young person boasts too boldly about trespassing into forsaken spots that ought to decay undisturbed. I once dismissed such talk with a scoff. Back then, I figured the greatest risk in a deserted dwelling was a rusty nail jab or a startled critter leaping from hiding. All that shifted after encountering the place atop the crest and those images that defied logic. I'm Lydia, and I once labeled myself an urban adventurer, despite the rural nature of my surroundings. I'd snap shots of corrosion and flaking coatings, discolored tubs, and shattered panes. There was something captivating about how vacant chambers whispered tales through their fine points. I convinced myself it was historical preservation. Truthfully, though, I pursued that elusive sensation, blending longing with dread. The dwelling in question perched high over a forsaken excavation settlement, gripping the incline as though determined not to tumble alongside the rest. Rumor had it that it once housed the mining overseer during the prosperous era in the hollow, when illumination glowed nightly and the supply outpost thrived. Once operations ceased, residents fled, and the building fell into shadow. I'd motored by it numerous times along the winding trail, merely noting its rooftop outline and the vacant gaze from its elevated panes. From the road, the place seemed ordinary, a weathered old house struggling against time and the elements. But up close, at the end of the lengthy drive with my camera slung over my shoulder, it hit differently. It loomed higher than expected, 3 slim levels rising from a sturdy stone base, all windows shattered or sealed with plywood, save for a lone one tucked high beneath the roofline. That pane was intact, and I couldn't dispel the sense that eyes were peering out from behind it, watching. The drive was crumbling pavement choked by weeds. A metal barrier had been padlocked across it long ago, but the chain now dangled loose, its clasp corroded away. I hopped the obstruction, my boots grinding against pebbles and shards of glass. The atmosphere hung thick, as if rain were brewing, yet the sky was cloudless, veiled only in a pale, glaring mist. Stepping indoors, the scent of mildew and soggy pages filled the air. Beams of light pierced through cracks in the window coverings, casting narrow bands across the wooden floors. It wasn't as jammed with junk as other spots I'd ventured into. Most furnishings had vanished, etched only by faint outlines on the dust where bulky items once rested. A couple of chairs remained, along with a shattered mirror and an overturned shelf leaking moldy novels. It resembled a skeleton stripped bare by foragers. I began downstairs, snapping my standard photos, arches leading to arches, peeling wall coverings drooping in ribbons, a twisting staircase ascending without its railing. Anxiety gnawed at me, as it always did in these haunts. And that thrill was exactly the draw. The nape of my neck tingled, the classic sign of an unseen presence, yet glances over my shoulder revealed nothing but emptiness. Things turned unsettling only when I climbed to the second story. A stretched corridor ran the length, flanked by chambers with doors mostly ajar. The planking sagged centrally, warped from countless footsteps treading the same route. I proceeded with caution, probing each board before committing my full weight. An icy breeze ghosted through the passage. Despite every pane up here being whole. The initial weird discovery was a snapshot flipped over in the hallway's center. It was a tiny Polaroid-style shot, fresh from one of those fun instant devices. I nearly left it untouched. When I finally lifted it, my gut twisted. The image captured me. Not from now, not from any familiar recollection. There I was, positioned dead center in the threshold of an unexplored space, gripping my camera, my face angled faintly as if straining to hear an off-frame noise. The viewpoint came from overhead and to the rear, suggesting a watcher perched on the steps above, gazing down. I rationalized it as coincidence. Perhaps I resembled another person, or it echoed some store window glimpse or old self-portrait. Tucking the print away, I pushed onward. The depicted room was the immediate one to the left. Arriving there, my inhale hitched. The molding, the ragged drape dangling from its hook, the shadows pooling on the ground. It all aligned perfectly. I halted precisely where my twin appeared in the shot, mirroring the pose with my gear. The chill deepened in that space, sharp as a fridge's blast. I retreated, chiding myself for overreacting. Even so, I didn't linger much upstairs. A hasty circuit, a handful of hasty captures, then up the steps to the top. I ought to have bailed right there. Hindsight screams it. Yet nosiness runs deep in me, a stubborn affliction I've never shaken. The uppermost level felt tighter, the roof pitch pressing the ceiling low. Just one narrow passage, ending at 2 entries. The first opened to a clutter of crates and antique chests. The second wouldn't budge, secured fast. I twisted the handle out of reflex, not expectation. The unyielding resistance, the firm timber beneath my palm, sent my heart racing. Abruptly, I craved the outdoors with fierce urgency. Wheeling to leave, that's when the next image caught me. It protruded just slightly from beneath a loosened plank, deliberate enough to snag attention. With unsteady hands, I extracted it, sharper than the first, less bleached by age, another instant snap. Once more, it starred me, this time paused on the floor below, halfway along that extended hall, eyes fixed on an object in my grasp. That object? The initial picture. I don't recall sinking to the ground, but suddenly I was there, slumped against the partition, both images cradled in my arms. A droning filled my head, like angry bees. Over and over I insisted on logic. A stalker, perhaps? An intricate hoax? The building stayed deathly quiet, broken only by the subtle groans of wood shifting in place. Compelling myself upright, I vowed a thorough sweep. Every space, every nook, shouting challenges, striding boldly as if I ruled it all. Any intruder would falter eventually. That became my strategy. I ignored the impulse and retreated toward the staircase, gripping the railing with one hand while keeping my gaze fixed on the sealed door at the hallway's far end. About midway down those initial steps, my boot struck an object that slid away. I clutched the banister tightly and glanced downward. Another photo had landed on the stair. This shot came from the base of the stairs, angled upward through the spaces between the treads. There I appeared bent over the rail just like in that instant, lips parted in an unspoken swear, fingers clutching the timber. At the stair's summit behind me loomed a figure. It wasn't distinct, merely a deeper blotch amid the gloom. Something about human stature emerging from the shadows near the barred door. The silhouette of its head looked off, elongated on one side, as if motion had caused a smear during capture. I refused to glance behind. I couldn't. Turning to find emptiness might shatter my sanity. Turning to discover a presence would surely do the same. Instead, I locked my stare on the entrance below and proceeded downward. I avoided sprinting. I didn't wish to detect footsteps pursuing me. Beyond the threshold, the atmosphere seemed sparse and overly luminous. I reached my vehicle, flung my camera amid the images on the seat beside me, and sped off without checking the mirror until the structure lay beyond 2 hilltops. That evening I arranged the photos across my kitchen counter. 4 in total now. I had no recollection of retrieving the final one. In it, I stood at my entryway, fumbling with the key, neck craned as though a voice from the lawn had summoned me. The viewpoint was from the opposite side of the road. I relocated soon after. I quit urban exploration. To my acquaintances, I claimed burnout, expressing interest in capturing nuptials or headshots instead. The images remain stashed in a footwear container at the rear of my wardrobe. Occasionally, I consider incinerating them, yet dread the consequences. From time to time, while browsing my device, an unfamiliar image surfaces. It's invariably identical. My rear view in a threshold or on steps, bordered by the entrance to some shadowy chamber. The file details indicate a timestamp when I swear my phone rested in my pocket. Perhaps an individual lurks nearby, pranking me, shadowing my steps, chronicling me as I once chronicled vacant spaces. Perhaps the dwelling atop the ridge held no vacancy. Perhaps it merely selected a fresh focus. Folks claim the peaks retain all recollections. What they omit is that occasionally the peaks retain you as well. When I finally consented to enter the Miller's Fork house, I'd already absorbed far too many tales surrounding it. In these parts, locals cloak facts in gossip to render them more palatable. Yet each recounting shared the core skeleton. A household that vanished sans belongings. An underground chamber folks avoided mentioning. And a lawman who cautioned youths that discovery on the premises meant direct arrest, bypassing parental notification. That final detail ought to have deterred me. It failed. I'm Nathaniel, and at the time, I was 20, restless and foolish in that precise manner reserved for those convinced misfortune strikes only strangers in headlines. My relative Rowan had acquired a weathered SUV, convincing himself of its indestructibility. He aimed to record our personal series on derelict homes and upload it digitally. I suggested opting for deserted shacks or a weathered silo. He dismissed it, declaring, quote, 18. The most notorious was the Miller's Fork house. It perched at the terminus of a potholed gravel track, branching from an overlooked secondary route beyond a corroded no trespassing placard perforated by gunfire until gaps pierced the wording. The structure dwarfed its neighbors. Erected in the era of abundant coal wealth, it rose 2 levels in weathered siding, its expansive veranda drooping from neglect. Most apertures were sealed from within with plywood. The surviving glass panels, thick with filth, merely echoed distorted tree lines. We pulled up beneath a cluster of evergreens and doused the headlights. The heavens held that lifeless azure hue preceding total nightfall, while cicadas buzzed relentlessly, nearly submersive like ocean depths. Rowan shouldered his pack. Lanterns, pry bar, recorder, the basics, and flashed a smirk my way. "Final opportunity to bail?" he teased. I snapped at him to be quiet and headed along the trail. My words came out reedy, even in my ears. The main entrance was secured, sturdy with the bolt still latched. No signs of external breach. That detail should have reassured me. It didn't. We veered to the rear and spotted a bulkhead embedded in the earth. The timber warped and splintered. Its fastener was modern, a gleaming brass hasp clashing with the edifice's antiquity. Somebody had lately reinforced this section's seclusion. Rowan eyed me, gaze alight. "Quote 21, he murmured, then wrenched the clasp free with the tool. It demanded more effort than anticipated. The latch finally snapped with a harsh clang of metal against metal, echoing sharply through the heavy dusk. Cicadas fell quiet instantly, as if silenced by an unseen hand. We stood motionless, ears straining. No dogs howled, no vehicles slammed shut. Only a fresh noise emerged. Water dripped steadily from below, the sound rising through the gap as Rowan eased the cellar panels apart. A wave of chilly, moist air escaped, laced with scents of raw concrete, faded bleach, and a faint metallic tang beneath. We descended. The concrete stairs glistened with dampness underfoot. Bracing against the wall, my fingers traced deep gouges in the surface, as though claws had raked the fresh pour long ago. Downstairs, our beams pierced the gloom. illuminating a cramped area split into 3 parts. One held sagging racks and shattered glassware from forgotten preserves. Another contained the boiler space, its pipes corroded and twisted. Then, past a sturdy timber barrier, came the final chamber. That barrier used fresh lumber, braced by steel strips and secured with a pair of external locks. My gut twisted. "Quote 22, I murmured. Rowan stayed silent, already recording, murmuring softly about vintage cellars and likely spots for jarring produce, acting oblivious to the obvious. The locks, the gouges encircling them, the fractured frame where force had struck from within. Scuff marks scarred the floor, too, subtle yet clear in our glow. Drag trails. "Let's grab a few frames and leave," I urged. He agreed with a dip of his head, yet he lingered near that barrier like a sore spot demanding attention. His hand grazed the steel. Those locks showed recent use. The corrosion cracked, gleaming fresh. The one who'd sealed it had released it again, and soon. Quote 23 I warned. Quote 24, he fibbed, palm lingering. Quote 25. The panel shifted inward slightly, groaning with effort, like some weary force nudged it from beyond. He yanked back as if scorched. We gaped. Nothing emerged. No noise, no gust, no stir. Time blurred as we lingered there. At last, I made myself step to the far side, feigning curiosity over a line of rusted pegs. That's when the panel caught my eye. Propped against the wall, partly obscured by a toppled seat, it was aged plywood, buckled and plastered with new snippets beneath faded adhesive. Intrigue briefly eclipsed dread. I swept my light across it, and the glare reflected familiar headlines, clustered in a way I'd never seen. Local drifter's corpse, missing for weeks, identified near the district border. Bones discovered in state woods. Fledgling youth vanishes at transit hub. The timelines spanned nearly 15 years. Several bore images, cheerful yearbook shots, ID snapshots. Beneath every piece, precise angular script noted a date and one stark term. Found. Not found. Too late. My mouth parched. "Rowan," I whispered, "check this out." He approached, sweeping his lens over it. His ray snagged on a central attachment, a regional chart marked with crimson loops around remote lanes and ravines. One loop, redrawn repeatedly until bold, centered exactly on our position. Miller's Fork scrawled next to it in matching capitals. On the shelf below rested a coiled journal, spread to a sheet crammed with tight script. The opening lines echoed a disappearance report I'd scanned online half a year prior, about a young woman gone from a fill-up station in the next township. But what followed strayed from any report, penned like personal logs. Grabbed at the nozzle, fought back, sedated, hauled to this spot. It continued, revived in hysterics, quieted after 12 hours. My sight narrowed. I leafed through haphazardly. Additional cases, additional jottings. Certain accounts closed with disposed, others cut off abruptly. From behind, the barrier to the last space creaked wider by an inch. My beam trembled. "We have to leave," I insisted. "Immediately, now." Rowan offered no protest. His face had blanched beneath the summer burn. We retreated step by step, beams fixed on the slit. Briefly, I glimpsed motion within, a vague form teasing the edge of vision. Yet it might have been imagination populating the void. Then came the sound. Gravel crunched under tires above. A ride entering the yard. We doused our lights reflexively, Blackness slammed down, tangible and thick. Just our breaths and the house's subtle creaks broke the quiet. Directly overhead, planks sighed. Measured steps traversed the cooking area. A portal swung, then latched. He'd returned. The maker of that display, the scribe of those records, the locker of that barrier, the user of this undercroft for purposes far from mere food storage. Rowan's grip clamped onto my sleeve in the pitch black, his fingers pressing deep enough to leave marks. My pulse thundered in my ears so fiercely that I swore the person pacing above could pick up on it. We stayed stock still as the footsteps crisscrossed the ceiling like they were searching every room below. Escaping to the stairs meant crossing that exposed patch right in front of the third door. No way around it. Down here, there were 0 windows, no alternate ways out. Zilch. We were stuck in what felt like the most silent spot imaginable, with an intruder shuffling right over our heads. And who could say what lurked beyond that door? One folks had once fought tooth and nail to seal tight. Suddenly, a bulb flickered on above, sending slender rays of light seeping through the floor's gaps. Tiny motes of dust danced in those slim shafts, drifting down like flakes in winter. A soft, strange voice murmured a formless tune, growing a touch stronger as it headed back to the kitchen area. I lost track of how much time dragged on. Minutes warped, pulling long, then snapping short. Eventually, the steps halted. A door banged shut somewhere distant, perhaps the main entrance. A motor roared to life, then dwindled away down the path. We held our positions for a solid minute once the noise vanished. At last, Rowan murmured, quote, 28. We switched our flashlights back on and headed for the staircase. Hugging the walls to stay as far from that gaping door as the space permitted. As we went by, I willed myself to keep my eyes straight ahead, but the edge of my sight gave me away. Inside, a chain was anchored to the ground. Trailing to an unused cuff, with gouges in the concrete fanning outward, like something had scraped paths in a frantic bid to drag itself toward the threshold. We exploded from the cellar, tripped into the wan twilight glow, and kept sprinting until we'd piled into the SUV, doors secured, and engine howling as Rowan slammed it into reverse. The ride back passed in total silence between us. That evening, I dialed the sheriff's department from a public phone across the county line. I skipped my name, just urged them to inspect the basement at the Miller's Fork House. The operator's tone flattened the instant I named the spot. He mentioned they knew about the site. He assured me a team would head out. His words carried the weight of repetition, like he'd uttered them dozens of times. Seasons passed. One day, the local broadcast displayed the Miller's Fork House cordoned off with yellow tape. A familiar face from town, some guy I'd spotted at the hardware store, emerged in restraints. The reporter rattled off terms like several charges, alleged murders, long-lost suspects. They branded him a hunter of the worst kind. Nothing came up about the bulletin board, the journal, or the restraint. Rowan and I viewed it side by side, wordless. When they flashed pixelated shots of the lower level, I spotted the wall that once held the board, now stripped clean, coated in new whitewash. "You still got the recording?" I ventured. He shook his head no. The footage had glitched out. From the instant his hand met that fortified door to the clip of us emerging outside, it was just blank noise on playback. The only sharp remnant was one frozen image he insisted wasn't his doing. The pair of us at the stair base, gazes lifted to the lens, expressions startled, illuminated by a glow that matched neither of our beams. That underground room haunts my thoughts more than I care to confess. I dwell on how fresh certain entries in the notebook appeared, how near some red rings sat to my daily roots. I question whether my tip-off changed a thing, or if the guy upstairs would have tripped himself up sooner or later. What robs me of sleep is realizing how simple it would have been to end up as 2 extra notes pinned up there. 2 additional entries, marked with 1 crisp term in that precise script. Discovered or vanished, based on his mood for caution that time. In our household, faith rarely comes up in conversation, but we do share tales of locations. My grandma often remarked, certain structures rise on flawed lines in the divine ledger, corners where the phrasing kinks awkwardly. Such sites may switch hands or crumble to dust, but the flaw lingers. I didn't grasp her point until the evening we stumbled upon the chapel, hidden among the woods. I'm Helena, and a few years back I booked a remote cabin in the Appalachians alongside 3 old college buddies. We craved something affordable, serene, and worlds from dorm life. A retreat where the soul pressures were restocking the woodpile. The place we ended up in was far more weathered than the online shots suggested, yet it had a snug charm, situated high on a slope overlooking a skinny dirt lane, surrounded solely by forest. Upon arrival, the landlord passed over the key plus a printed sheet of guidelines. Keep meals put away. Leave the furnishings untouched. Absolutely, in heavy print, steer clear of the dividing fence out back. We chuckled over the final rule. It struck us as the sort of warning a guardian might toss at young campers. The property owner offered only a faint grin when we pressed him on the reason, murmuring, "It slopes away down there. Ancient boundary, forgotten dealings. Stick to this side? It's the wise choice." Those initial 2 days passed without incident. We wandered the trails, scorched our meals over the fire, and swapped spooky tales on the veranda, acting far more youthful than our years suggested. It was the waning light of the 3rd afternoon, when the shadows turned a deep indigo amid the branches, that Rowan, a different Rowan from the earlier mention, this one a classmate from my anthro class, spotted the barrier. It lurked behind a snarl of shrubs, partially obscured, its timbers darkened by decades. Past it, the forest parted in a precise row, resembling a wild trail snaking downhill. "Forgotten dealings, right?" she scoffed, 1 foot already hooked on the lower rung. "Bet he's concealing something awesome beyond." I ought to have held her back. So should the rest of us. But we trailed after, clambering across the railing sequentially, as if breaching an invisible threshold. The atmosphere shifted once we crossed, growing eerily still. The distant hum of the highway and stream faded, like we'd sealed off the world behind a barrier. The trail bent into a gentle depression. Abruptly, the woods gave way, revealing a modest white structure topped with a listing spire that somehow hadn't collapsed, cradled in the earth's dip, as if rooted there naturally. It seemed too compact for a real chapel, yet not ordinary enough for a dwelling. Slender, elongated panes were blanked inside by faded newsprint. No emblem, no plaque, no label. Quote 37, Rowan declared, her words echoing overly in the hush. Quote 38. Drawing nearer, the place appeared more dilapidated. Flakes of paint curled off in sheets, exposing weathered planks beneath. The entry stairs had decayed centrally, forcing us to leap the breach. The entrance stood shut but unlatched. As we nudged it ajar, the fittings wailed in a rusty tongue of objection. Within, an unnatural chill gripped the air, not merely brisk, but a penetrating frost that numbed fingertips and gnawed at the jaw. The interior formed a single expansive chamber under a squat roofline. Absent any benches or sanctuary, the planks gleamed empty, save for meticulously arranged rings of salt, skirting just shy of the edges, each roughly the span of a reclined body. Tucked in the rear alcove, rows of glass vessels stood orderly, brimming with murky fluid and suspended flecks of withered foliage, or perhaps aged scraps of parchment. Against the facing partition, a sequence of kids' footwear aligned tip to heel. Varied in scale, all antiquated, several with cords knotted in pairs. Silence hung for a beat as we froze, attuned only to our breaths and the subtle creaks of the timbers. Creepy atmosphere, my pal Cecilia murmured, aiming for levity. It landed flat. I attempted to make sense of it. Folks in remote spots often indulged in odd ceremonies. I'd watched plenty of films on the topic. Perhaps remnants of some 70s collective or devotion group overly fond of theatrics. Yet the salt appeared recent, the borders crisp, untouched by grime, no traces of rodents or insects. Dust coated the interiors of those rings, while the surrounding boards shone, swept, and pristine. Rowan edged toward the closest outline. "Don't!" I snapped, harsher than intended. She halted, toe grazing the perimeter. "Chill out. It's merely chalk art. Some occult social media gimmick." She pulled out her device and began filming, voice feigning playfulness that clashed with her rigid posture. I wandered to the containers. Closer inspection revealed minuscule folded notes within, some inscribed with tight script, names smudged by the solution. Several rang a bell, local clan titles from rural boxes or youth sports gear. "This isn't creative," I uttered softly. "It's different." Then, a low hum rose behind me. It began gently, a wordless melody, akin to a kid fumbling through a cradle song. I pivoted, assuming Cecilia or Rowan was fooling about. Their eyes locked on mine in alarm. "Helena," Cecilia breathed. "That's not coming from us." The tune persisted, drifting from overhead. We craned our necks, simple planking arched above. No gallery, no attic hatch in sight. The noise shifted across the space to hover above a salt ring, then another, unbroken by any inhale. A shiver raced over me. "We need to leave," I urged. "Immediately. They warned us off this spot. Whatever's happening here doesn't belong to us." That's when Rowan's display blanked out. She jabbed at it, figuring it had timed out. No luck. She pressed the power key for a reboot. Zilch. Quote 48, she claimed, but the indicator blinked at 80% when she checked. The gadget stayed inert. Cecilia tested her own. Blank face, yet power full. The hum altered once more, forming what seemed like a rhythm. I noticed my pulse syncing with it, quickening as the tones rose and easing when they lingered. A tension mounted behind my eyes, akin to lingering too near a blaring speaker during a show, though the noise wasn't overpowering. It simply permeated everything in an unnatural manner. "Step across the salt," Rowan uttered abruptly, her tone devoid of inflection. "Just one time. Observe the outcome." The remark clashed so sharply with her typical playful banter that I momentarily assumed it came from another voice. Her gaze fixed on the closest ring, 1 foot inching ahead. Her fingers trembled, yet her limb advanced as if controlled by an external force. I seized her wrist and pulled her away sharply. "No." She blinked rapidly, as if emerging from a trance. "What?" "You suggested stepping over it," I explained. She shook her head deliberately. "I never said that. I was merely considering it." The hum cut off abruptly in the middle of a tone. The ensuing quiet was far more unsettling. In that instant, the entire structure appeared to tilt inward, like the barriers inhaling deeply. From beneath the floorboards, a lone, crisp rap echoed, resembling a hefty object striking timber from underneath. That shattered our resolve. We fled, stumbling into one another, groping for the exit. As we passed the doorway, our phones buzzed simultaneously in our pockets, displays igniting with a barrage of delayed alerts from that span. We'd spent just 9 minutes within. It had seemed eternal. We kept sprinting until we'd recrossed the barrier behind the cabin. The atmosphere there felt less oppressive, simpler to inhale. In the distance, nestled in the valley, the modest pale structure rested silently amid the foliage, as though it had always been mute. That evening, sleep evaded us all. Our devices, which functioned normally after departing the dip, had each captured 1 audio clip while we were there, despite no one activating recording. On my file, nothing but the persistent low drone filled the space, intimate and unrelenting. Beneath it, a subtler noise escaped my initial notice. The soft drag of something against timber in deliberate, measured sweeps, reminiscent of a naked soul probing the boundary of a ring it couldn't breach. We checked out ahead of schedule. The owner offered only a curt incline of his head as I placed the key on the counter while we packed the vehicle. At last, he addressed me. "Quote 55, he inquired. It wasn't phrased as a query. I parted my lips to fabricate a response, then sealed them. "We didn't enter," I replied truthfully, at least in what I omitted. He examined my expression for an extended beat, a trace of compassion in his gaze. "Structures like that were erected deliberately," he murmured. "Not for reverence, but to hold something in. Locals relocated and lost sight of the barrier's intent. The barriers never did." I nearly questioned him about the consequences of breaching those rings, or if the labels in those vessels could ever be wiped clean. Rather, I climbed into the car and closed the door. Ever since, any drone emanating from the unit overhead has me pausing. I tally the pitches. I strain for the subsequent thud. Thus far, it's merely the resident's television or a washing unit humming away. Yet occasionally, in the deep hours, it aligns with my heartbeat in a familiar pulse, and I scan my quarters angles for a streak of salt I can't recall placing. The initial mention of the dwelling at the terminus of Bitter Creek Road didn't come from an inebriated patron in a tavern or a restless youth in class. It originated with my grandfather, and his intent wasn't to frighten, but to safeguard my life. "Should you lose your bearings amid those heights," he instructed, gesturing toward the shadowy tree line signaling the ascent to the upper slopes, "and spot a two-level homestead with crimson hue surviving solely beneath the overhangs, and a withered oak sprouting directly through the veranda, you reverse course, regardless if it's pouring shards of ice. You pivot and depart." I was 13 at the time and dismissed it as exaggeration. When I reached an age to navigate those paths independently, he'd passed. The caution echoed more as a challenge in my thoughts than guidance. That's where this account begins. Not via specter or myth, but through my 21-year-old self, itching for novelty and too bullheaded to leave ancient cautions undisturbed. My companion Rowan arrived from the urban sprawl for an extended getaway, pursuing electric storms and genuine upland oddities to bolster his photo collection. By the second evening, we'd exhausted the standard haunts: the corroded span, the forsaken fuel outpost, the vacant chapel stripped of its colored panes. Rowan craved more. I erred by sharing the tale of Bitter Creek. Quote 61, I remarked, partly to him, partly to convince myself. Quote 62. Quote 63, he countered. Quote 64. The route to Bitter Creek twisted as a slim ribbon of fractured pavement along the hillside. Absent any barriers, only scattered stones at the brink, and a steep plunge into the woods should you err. Mist hung heavy in the roadside gullies despite the cloudless sky overhead. As we rounded the final bend, my phone's signal cut out so abruptly that the alert tone rang like a heavy door banging shut. The entrance to the property appeared midway through a sharp, hidden turn, just a pair of muddy tracks vanishing into the thick brush, flagged by a tilted, unnamed mailbox. A fallen placard rested partially submerged in the overgrowth. The words "No trespassing" had been blasted away with bullets and clumsily covered in paint, as though the owner had issued a warning only to second-guess it moments later. We jostled along those tracks in Rowan's battered Jeep, with foliage scraping harshly against the vehicle until the woods abruptly receded, unveiling the structure looming ahead. Recognition hit me an instant before my mind fully processed it. A two-level building with faded red coating flaking off in patches beneath the roofline, a veranda encircling the facade like a lopsided smile, and a massive oak thrusting upward directly through a gap in the decking, its lifeless limbs reaching toward the heavens. Quote 66, I whispered under my breath. Quote 67, Rowan inquired, snatching up his camera. Quote 68, I fibbed. This was the place. Viewed from nearby, the building exuded an indefinable unease. The dimensions seemed distorted, the panes overly elongated and slim, the eaves drooping under an implied burden rather than mere years of neglect. Scratches marred several of the veranda supports. At least, that's what flashed through my head first. Profound gouges in sets of 3, beginning roughly at torso level and raking downward. No bear I'd encountered could have reared up to that stature and extended its reach so far. We crossed onto the veranda. It yielded slightly beneath our weight, yet held firm. The main entrance stood ajar, warped from prolonged exposure to the elements. A subtle odor drifted from within. Not the typical mustiness of decay, but a pungent, acrid tang reminiscent of a damp creature confined in cramped quarters for far too long. Quote 69, I ventured. Quote 70. Quote 71. Rowan replied, brandishing a sturdy torch and a pocket knife that served more as a token than a real tool. He nudged the door wider using his boot, his camera already capturing the scene. The initial detail that caught my eye indoors was the restraints. They were secured to the planks in the entry area, thick, corroded chains of a rusty hue, terminating in vacant cuffs large enough to encircle an adult's leg. The flooring bore deep furrows around each anchor, with curved gashes extending outward like traces of prolonged, confined prowling. The wall covering hung in tatters at about head level, torn by an entity that had strained repeatedly but fallen short of the sills. "All right. That's not creepy in the slightest," Rowan murmured. He swung the lens toward me. "You left out the detail about them securing whatever this was inside." "I had no idea," I admitted, noticing how my tone had unconsciously softened to a hush. The space beyond was largely barren, an overturned seat, a shattered stand, drapes that had disintegrated ages ago, reduced to oxidized bars. Yet stains marred the overhead as well, dark streaks resembling soot traces curling in odd, repetitive swirls along the joists. We ventured further inside. The cooking area lay in shambles, with cupboards in disarray and a basin yanked partially loose from its mounting, but the rear exit had been fortified internally using boards and additional restraints, suggesting equal concern for containment as for intrusion. Throughout, I couldn't dispel the sensation of observation, not from expected spots like frames or thresholds, but from the shadowed recesses, the voids under bulky items, the narrow clearance below the lowest tread, as if the resident favored crouched perches. Quote, 75, Rowan blurted out. I froze, holding still. Initially, only the structure's creaks and our respiration filled the air. Then, from beneath us, a faint rasping emerged, methodical, deliberate. A pull, followed by a halt, then repeating. Likely the plumbing, I offered on reflex, despite knowing full well no plumbing had functioned here for generations. Rowan's light pierced a slender panel beneath the steps, weathered and crumbling. A recent clasp dangled unlocked on the hasp, implying a rushed departure. The rasping intensified, directly on the other side of that flimsy divide. Quote 77, he stated. Quote 78, I began, but he'd already grasped the knob. The panel creaked open on protesting fittings, exposing a sharp decline of timber treads plunging into darkness. A chill gust surged upward, laden with that intensified musky bitterness potent enough to coat the tongue. My vision blurred from the sting. Briefly, I glimpsed motion at the base, something slender and ashen retreating from the glow of the beam. "No way," I declared. "That's it. We've got plenty of material. Time to leave." He paused, lens pointed downward. "Just a quick take. I traveled this distance." The rasping ceased. In the ensuing quiet, a new noise surfaced, barely audible, possibly hallucinatory. Respiration, labored and moist, from inefficient bellows. It echoed from nowhere specific, It emerged from the space beneath the staircase, oozing through fissures in the floor at our backs, slipping past the slats on the veranda, enveloping us with its presence. Every strand of hair on my skin prickled. "Rowan," I uttered, my words emerging faint and unfamiliar. "Turn back. Don't sprint. Simply pivot and head outside right now." He must have sensed it as well, since he didn't protest this time. We retreated from the exposed stairwell, our beams of light jittering. Below in the shadows, something stirred, a heavy form scraping over cement. The initial tread groaned, not from our steps, but from force rising from underneath, as though an entity probed the planks from below. A second riser whined, then a third. We didn't proceed to the deck with prudent caution. We fled. Upon reaching the fresh outdoors, the structure appeared to release a breath, a deep, rumbling noise that could have been aging timber shifting, or perhaps something thwarted. Halfway along the weed-choked drive, a thunderous impact echoed in our wake, reverberating against the trunks. Rowan whirled, gripped firm on the recorder, and captured one fleeting image. The entryway flung open, a towering outline framed there momentarily against the faint glow inside. No bear, no creature I recognized. Its form was distorted, appendages overly extended, one shoulder elevated above the other. The skull tilted at a slant that sent a twinge through my own neck just viewing it. Those sparks, if they were eyes, seized the dying light and gleamed like a beast caught in beams. Then it vanished, yanked into obscurity as if reeled in. The respiration halted abruptly, like a tap shut off. The forest fell into that eerie hush it adopts just prior to a tempest unleashing. We stayed mute until we reached the paved highway, wheels churning stones. The dwelling and its withered oak concealed beyond the hillside bend. Rowan at last examined the display, fingers quivering. "You catch that?" he inquired. I had no desire to confirm, yet I dipped my head. He fast-forwarded the recording. The interviews remained, shackles scattered on the ground, scratches gouged into the surfaces, the unlocked cellar entrance. The sound was a barrage of interference, interrupted solely by brief, soggy, straining inhales that weren't ours. At the segment where he'd pivoted on the path, the clip faltered. The picture stuttered, blurred, then leaped to us already on the thoroughfare. That lone shot of the shape at the threshold never materialized, regardless of his painstaking review. He insists he glimpsed it via the viewfinder. I insist I witnessed it firsthand. The device recalls events otherwise. I shared my grandma's ancient tale with nobody afterward. These days, when folks at the tavern mention Bitter Creek, I seal my lips. Allow them to view it as merely a spot for vagrants to bunk or youths to revel. Permit them to dismiss the elders' cautions. On certain late evenings, as gusts descend the slope and clatter against my mobile home's panels, another noise layers beneath. A deliberate grating pull. A snap akin to timber-bearing excessive burden. Respiration that syncs imperfectly with my own. During those hours, my thoughts drift to that lifeless oak thrusting through the veranda, the links embedded firmly in the parlor's base, the new hasp somebody once installed on the lower level's portal. My granddad never revealed what they can find in that building, just that I ought to avoid seeking it out. I ignored him. Now I grasp a truth I'd rather evade. Whatever they constructed that structure to contain didn't resemble a specter. It carried weight, it harbored appetite, and for one fleeting, foolish instant, it recognized my name as Tobias and deemed me too sluggish to merit escape. Each mountain settlement harbors at least one legend it whispers to deter children from straying too deep into the night. In ours, it centered on the Lantern Bride. As a child, the bigger kids warned, quote, 85 I clung to that notion until maturity brought my grandmother's authentic account. By that point, I'd realized an unspoken fact. At times, tales expand from a kernel of reality, much like tissue forms over embedded fragments. I'm Cecilia, and I ought to have recognized the folly in revisiting that abode. It lurked along the forgotten highway, partially veiled by vines and brushy evergreens. The sort of sight you overlook unless you've traversed it daily on the bus to school. 2 levels, pitched gables, veranda drooping toward the gully. In certain lighting, traces of its former vibrant azure coating lingered. Locals dubbed it the Saunders Place, yet no occupant had claimed it since my infancy. Its true notoriety stemmed from the attached lore. The milder rendition circulated in grade school was straightforward. A jilted bride, utterly devastated, trudged back to that old house through the downpour and simply disappeared. Soon after, motorists began spotting a figure in a tattered gown standing roadside after dark, clutching a lantern, each sighting edging slightly nearer to the settlement than the last. Nobody confessed to pulling over for her, but everyone claimed to know a relative's pal who had. Such tales circulated widely. The account my grandma shared one sweltering evening after indulging in her own brewed spirits diverged sharply. She insisted the Saunders daughter hadn't been abandoned mid-ceremony. Instead, she'd bolted willingly, sneaking from the church's rear exit with a fellow her kin would have scorned. They reached the sharp turn near the house before the vehicle veered off, as locals euphemistically put it, to sidestep details of tire marks and fatal injuries. The fiancé perished instantly. The woman survived. With a shattered leg, she dragged herself the remaining distance home, hauling the wrecked lantern along and smearing a bloody path up the driveway. When folks finally discovered her, she lay on the veranda, her hands scraped bloody from pounding the entrance. The lantern's pane lay in shards, yet the flame endured. My grandma maintained the relatives interred her in the cemetery and sealed the dwelling tight. My grandma also claimed it proved futile. I departed for university, relocated 3 hours distant, and transformed my early years into amusing anecdotes for social gatherings. The lantern-wielding bride proved popular. It captivated even more when I revealed the abode actually existed. Thus, returning that autumn to sort through Grandma's affairs amid faded yearbooks from my old academy, pals proposed revisiting spots we'd once challenged one another to infiltrate for thrills. I sensed the evening's destination from the start. Our group consisted of 4, myself, Julian, Marjorie, and Isolde, who'd arrived mid-freshman year and always carried an air of skepticism toward local lore. We kicked off at the shuttered cinema and the gutted depot along the rails. As we veered onto the highway leading to the Saunders property, the chill of early November nipped the air, and the cloudless heavens made the constellations seem within reach. "We're seriously attempting this?" Marjorie queried from behind, hugging her torso tight. "Lighten up," Julian urged. "We've chatted about it forever. Just one final foolish adventure before we settle into dull grown-up routines." Part of me yearned to refuse, to mention how sifting through Grandma's belongings had immersed me plenty in mortality, without inviting more spectral encounters. But my voice betrayed me. Quote, 89. The structure appeared diminished in my memory, slumping toward the gully, its stoop leaning as if eavesdropping on highway chatter. Interior barricades concealed the forward panes, though the foggy, web-veined sheets remained. Vandals had scrawled a crude affection symbol on the siding, partially obscured by a crossing slash. We doused the beams and allowed vision to adapt. The pavement stretched deserted both ways, a dark strip vanishing amid foliage. Quote 90. Isolde declared, shutting the vehicle door with undue force. Quote 91. Quote 92. I replied without hesitation. The main entry had warped closed. We accessed via a flank portal, a culinary sash whose pane had vanished ages ago. The sill decayed through. Within, the odor evoked aged timber, grit, and a subtle sugary note beneath, reminiscent of withered blooms or faded cologne. Our light rays danced across clutter, collapsed plaster from above, a toppled seat, and peeling wall coverings in ragged peels. Initially, it felt mundanely unremarkable. A dilapidated scullery, a parlor boasting a lifeless hearth and barren shelf, void of keepsakes. Scrawled tags, timelines, lewd sketches marred the surfaces. Solely the living area's core flooring unnerved me. Its planks gleamed subtly, tinged in a subtle ring, hinting some substantial covering or weight had rested there enduringly. "That's where they stashed the corpse, huh?" Julian quipped feebly, then regretted it. "She passed on the steps outside, not within," I countered instinctively, sounding overly certain as if I'd witnessed it. Quote 95. Isolde probed, eyeing me closely. Quote 96, I stated. And the space chilled further. We ought to have halted. Perhaps the noise wouldn't have drawn us on otherwise. It began faintly. So faint I mistook it for breezes, the tinkling of crystal on steel in irregular pulses. Too faltering for timekeeping, yet patterned beyond chance. "Anyone catching that?" Marjorie breathed. Silence enveloped us. The noise repeated, sharper, fragile chimes on an object, a soft jangle, then metal grazing timber faintly. It echoed from beyond the walls. Something was prowling just beyond the porch. Julian locked eyes with me and silently formed the words, "Someone's out there." "Maybe it's just a critter," Isella murmured. "Or perhaps a prankster trying to spook us." The rhythmic taps halted directly in front of the entrance. A dark silhouette crossed the narrow gap beneath the door, cutting off the faint glow from the street. For a split second, the whole scene froze in suspense. Then, ever so gently, Knuckles grazed the opposite side of the panel, delivering a tentative, oddly courteous rap. We all stayed rooted in place. The rapping repeated, a touch more insistent. "Cecilia," came a female voice, pressed flush against the barrier. It wasn't phrased as an inquiry. It didn't carry the detachment of an unfamiliar caller. It echoed the cadence of my grandmother summoning me inside as twilight fell, the familiar lilt, the weary fondness. My sight blurred with heat, tunneling in. My logical side latched onto the sole conclusion: a pursuer, someone familiar with my past. Yet no one around here uttered my name with that tenderness these days. They clipped it, teased it, mangled it. Only she had infused it with such heartfelt glow. "Don't!" Marjorie hissed near my ear as though she could read my impulse. The atmosphere grew dense, oppressive. My legs weighed like lead, the scuffed spot on the planks suddenly mired in sludge. The doorknob quivered within its socket, easing a hair's breadth, like hands unsure of their strength. The lock held firm. No matter who or what lingered beyond, only the untouched deadbolt barred entry. "Please," the voice pleaded, but now it twisted, layered unnaturally, voices clashing just off key. "It's chilly out here." Ehold's flashlight trembled in her grasp. The beam skimmed the frayed circle on the floor, revealing for the first time the subtle etchings encircling it. Shallow grooves, tiny X's, interlocking loops, wards against evil for those who put stock in such lore. Carvings folks made after calamity struck, hoping to ward off its return. "We need to exit the way we entered," Isolde urged, her tone quivering yet resolute. Through the rear window, no contact with that entrance. The knob twisted more. Timbers groaned. Without thinking, I edged closer. Marjorie clamped my arm, her nails biting half-moons into my flesh. "Cecilia," the voice murmured once more, nearer as if lips hovered at the seam. Beneath the intimacy lurked a razor-sharp brittleness, like steel on the verge of breaking. "You've returned. Open up." Now the scent hit me, damp soil laced with a sharp iron tang. It recalled the graveyard air after her burial as the casket descended, my vision watering. Deep down, I ached to fling the door wide, to glimpse her again and shatter my notions of the grave. Then Julian shattered the moment in a way I'll always remember. He launched into rapid chatter, his voice booming to drown it out. "Quote 102, he stammered, eyes fixed on me, ignoring the threshold. It splashed everywhere, even the stairs. I let out a sharp guffaw that caught in my throat. Whatever hold had gripped us fractured slightly. Reality sharpened. My grandmother was gone. The presence knew my name. Both facts stood alone. They didn't link. Isolde wasted no time. She guided us retreating through the kitchen, our footfalls echoing on the buckled wood. The knocks trailed us, scraping along the outer walls, pane against frame, hovering at chest height, like a lantern bobbing from an inexhaustible arm. When we scrambled out the kitchen pane, my knees buckled so fiercely I nearly toppled. The gully next to the building gaped like an inky void. The pavement stretched deserted. No vehicles, no walkers, no ghostly figure in white, merely our quartet and the harsh rasp of our breaths. We tumbled into the vehicle. The instant the motor roared, the Saunders porch lamp flared alive. Caked in grime and cobwebs, the bulb emitted a constant, eerie amber radiance, as if freshly switched from within. In its glare, for an instant, a shape materialized at the front pane. Not a complete form, just a profile facing our way, eye sockets blazing like captured fire. Then we rounded the curve, brake lights streaking crimson across the foliage. The dwelling vanished. At my grandmother's later, while sifting through the crates I'd unpacked over days, I uncovered a creased paper midway down one stack, amid recipe slips and faded snapshots, bearing my name in her precise script. not correspondence. A mere inventory. Lantern Bride, keep driving Saunders House, bar the portal. Certain glows aren't yours to claim. That's it. I no longer share the Lantern Bride tale as a jest. I share the tame tale with folks about a girl with a broken heart and the wisdom of staying out of trouble on remote paths. I skip the details of those etchings scratched into the ground, or how my own name echoed in that eerie dual tone, or the porch lamp that defied all logic by shining. Occasionally, while cruising the highway at night, I catch a subtle shimmer filtering through the branches by that weathered entrance. It sways at the level of a lantern gripped by an exhausted hand. I fix my gaze on the center stripes and grip the steering wheel firmly. Certain tales aren't meant for thrills. They're barriers holding back whatever lurks beyond a sealed threshold. Folks often claim that video tells the unvarnished truth. They talk as if recordings offer a shield, like replaying an event strips away its power to harm. I once shared that view. I figured a lens turned me into a mere watcher, not someone entangled in the action. That changed when I captured my brother vanishing into a derelict building on tape. All the recording confirmed was that certain voids remain forever empty. I'm Julian. At the time, I was 18, and my brother was 20. Tobias was his name, and he sparked my interest in poking around ruins. He dubbed it capturing overlooked corners. Truth be told, he simply thrived on trespassing into forbidden zones. I tagged along since he was my older sibling, and trailing him seemed like the most secure choice imaginable. That held until the instant it shattered. The structure that claimed him lurked at the terminus of a rugged offshoot from a narrow maintenance lane, scarcely passable by a vehicle. It went unnamed. Locals referred to it vaguely as the spot near the gravel pit, as if it were a mere footnote. Externally, it was unremarkable, a single-level hunker with a sagging roof and panels buckled from years of sun and neglect. The oddity was the mobile home sagging into the soil out back, partially caved in. Like the ground had started devouring it and then quit midway. We'd picked up the rumor from a fellow at the filling station who mentioned that area teens once gathered there for bashes until a disappearance spooked everyone into preferring the forest instead. He chuckled it off as folklore. Tobias's face brightened instantly. "That's our destination," he declared en route. "A pair of buildings, zero company. Ideal." I recall how the foliage thickened the deeper we ventured, limbs interlacing above the path, filtering the daylight into a dim, verdant haze. When we pulled up beside the corroded barrier sealing off the final stretch, my cell had dropped service entirely. Tobias saw it as a perk. "No distractions," he said. "Just the two of us and the building." From the front area, the shattered panes offered a clear view inside. It resembled all the other abandoned sites we'd visited: shattered furnishings, scrawled tags, glimpses of clouds through caved-in roofing. The atmosphere carried scents of grit and stale moisture. Quote, 103. Tobias instructed, passing me the compact recorder. Quote, 104. We bickered briefly. I resisted separating, not from terror but routine. We typically voiced our thoughts in tandem, trading quips. He dismissed it with an eye roll, calling me overly cautious. Ultimately, we followed his lead. We usually did. I entered the structure ahead, my footwear grinding over shards of glass and debris on the floorboards. I swept the device gradually, narrating the scene. A sofa with guts spilling out, stains spreading from leaks overhead, a trail of smudged prints at child level running down the corridor. Above the entrance, red spray proclaimed a gathering date, 2012, then slashed through with bold strokes. Below, in finer script, another message read, quote 105. It struck me as standard thrill-seeking drivel, a deterrent scrawled to unnerve intruders. I voiced that to the lens, aiming for more confidence than I mustered. Toward the rear lay a lone sleeping area. The frame stood empty, bedding vanished ages ago. The walls bore dense layers of script, mostly initials, some inked, others gouged deep, paired with timestamps on a handful. I knew a few surnames from the neighborhood. The rest drew blanks. Near the pane in one angle, the pattern shifted. The same script repeated relentlessly. A phrase dug so forcefully into the plaster it nearly pierced through. I was here. I was here. I was here. I was here. It persisted, a piling litany ascending the surface toward the eaves, the characters wavering and shrinking at the peak, as if the writer balanced precariously. The footage picked up my arm extending, fingers halting short of the uppermost mark. I muttered about isolation driving folks mad, about transience unraveling. My tone felt off-kilter in there. That's when the quiet registered. From the front space, no breeze whistled past the cracks, no foliage stirred outside. I couldn't pick up Tobias shouting from the yard like he always did whenever he spotted something interesting. In fact, I couldn't hear a single thing, not even my own breaths or the subtle whir of the camera. It felt as if the entire world's sound had been muted completely. I retreated into the corridor. The living area stood vacant, with sunlight streaming in low and tinged with an amber hue. Peering through the shattered pane, I spotted the trailer in the rear, its entrance ajar. Quote, 106, I shouted. My words emerged faint and remote, as though filtered through a barrier. No response. I convinced myself he was tucked away in the trailer, unable to catch my calls. In that initial moment, I reassured myself with plenty of explanations. I headed out the rear exit, camera still recording, pushing through the overgrown weeds toward the trailer. The earth yielded too easily beneath my footwear, unnaturally yielding, as if recently churned and not yet packed down. The nearer I approached, the more off the atmosphere seemed. It had dropped noticeably in temperature, raising chills on my arms despite the perspiration trickling along my back. The trailer's interior formed a slim corridor of gloom and clutter, with only scant light penetrating halfway. I paused at the entrance. A knot formed in my gut. Some primal instinct warned against entering. "Tobias, stop messing around," I said, raising my volume. "We have to finish before nightfall." Nothing. Then, barely audible from the depths within, a noise. Not quite speech, more akin to an attempt at words muffled by cloth. A damp, strangled whisper that might have been my name or merely random. I crossed the threshold. The flooring sagged right away, the whole frame tilting toward the spot where the soil appeared to be claiming it. Whatever had ripped away much of the fixed fixtures left behind splintered borders and bare stuffing. At the opposite end, in what should have been sleeping quarters, the ground gaped into an uneven, shadowy pit, roughly 4 feet wide. The surrounding metal was warped inward, suggesting a massive weight crashing down from overhead or thrusting upward from underneath. I advanced cautiously, inch by inch, bracing one hand against the partition for balance. The camera's display captured it more vividly than my memory. The rim of the pit was streaked with mud and a deeper stain. The loosened dirt underneath plunged into an abyss whose depths escaped my view. For an instant, I imagined pale digits clutching the frayed brink from beneath caked in soil. I recoiled, a sharp pang in my throat. Yet when I redirected the lens, the spot was empty. Only the void, exhaling icy drafts toward me. All my gut feelings urged me to flee, but I bent forward as much as safety allowed and yelled his name once more, my tone breaking. Quote 109. This time, a reply emerged from the shadows. Not speech, but a gasp interrupted mid-sob, as if a cry had begun and been forcibly stifled. Suddenly, reality's audio flooded back in a rush. Wind rustled, foliage whispered, and a crow cawed sharply from afar. My breathing thundered in my head, my legs nearly buckled. I staggered rearward, almost snagging on a shattered shelf, then bolted. The yard's traversal blurs in my mind. One video segment captures the dwelling receding in the distance. The following shows the Jeep's interior as I struggled with the ignition. I sat in the driver's spot, anticipating the side door to swing open. It stayed shut. 2 days on, when rescuers finally reached the site, they discovered my brother's shoe near the pit. They noted scrape lines on the framework where he could have lost footing. Probes lowered into the ground revealed twisted roots, discarded containers, skeletal remains of creatures. No corpse, no evidence of a cavern vast enough for an adult. The authorities labeled it an accident, then presumed. That final term didn't suit my brother, yet it appeared starkly printed. The recording I captured landed on an investigator's table, then returned to me via flash drive after months. "For your peace," he murmured, eyes fixed on the surface rather than me. I avoided viewing it initially. When I eventually played it solo in my bedroom under full illumination, a detail emerged that's haunted my rest ever since. There's a 2-second flicker early on, just as I enter the structure. The feed stutters, the picture distorts and realigns. Within that blur, in the gleam of a fractured wall mirror, both figures appear. Me at the entry and Tobias right over my shoulder, precisely as he stood then. As the visuals sharpen, I remain. He doesn't. The timestamp indicates his disappearance occurred prior to our arrival at the trailer, before the yielding terrain, before the flooring breach. Per the sole surviving documentation, my brother existed in one instant and vanished the next, without room for basic logic or sequence. I've replayed those 2 seconds far more often than I'd ever own up to. With every viewing, my mind scrambles to bridge the void where he belongs, but it always falls short. Folks claim that video never deceives. Perhaps that's accurate, yet it leaves out so much. It won't reveal what becomes of someone when the mountains grow weary of guiding you along their overlooked paths. Nor does it hint at the horrors lurking in shadowy voids beneath unclaimed homes, groping upward for the nearest source of warmth. Most imagine the scariest discovery in a forsaken dwelling is a specter. Ethereal figures in thresholds, chills in corridors, tales you can dismiss as optical illusions or frayed nerves. I shared that dread once. Then I entered a site so inherently malevolent, it required no phantoms. And these days, the living terrify me far more. I'm called Marjorie. My job in home health care involves drifting through strangers' residences, glimpsing the intimate fragments of their existence they hide from the world. Usually, it's mere disarray and dreadful shows on TV. Occasionally, it's insects swarming and signs of abandonment. But this occasion unearthed something far more sinister. It began with a steady patient of mine, an elderly lady by the name of Mrs. Poole, who had survived nearly all her kin and much of her hometown. She resided on the fringe of a modest Appalachian settlement, the sort featuring a single filling station, a lone chapel, and far more vacant properties than lived-in ones. Solitude weighed on her, though her wit cut like a blade, and she loved reminiscing about bygone days as if they might drop by unannounced. One afternoon, as I assisted her rifling through a carton of aged documents, she fished out a cluster of keys attached to a brass loop and dangled them between us like a venomous artifact. "Quote 111, she murmured. "Quote 112. I reminded her I wasn't in construction. She dismissed it with a wave. "I'm not after estimates," she replied. "Just reliable eyes to confirm it's truly deserted. Lately I've sensed something off about it. Nightmares of doors keep haunting me." I ought to have refused. It fell outside my duties. Yet her fear struck me as novel, raw and gnawing, like an unseen force eroding her from the shadows. Eventually, I agreed to detour there post my visits, poke around briefly, and fill her in. The route to the derelict boarding house twisted through a ravine I'd never ventured into before. Dense foliage crowded the edges, limbs intertwining above to cast the waning daylight into premature twilight. The structure emerged abruptly past a curve. 3 levels of weathered siding, an extended veranda, and a line of slender panes resembling vigilant gazes. No vehicles sat in the drive, no traces of habitation. Examined nearer, the edifice seemed tended to, not impeccably, but surpassing expectations for a site allegedly ignored for years. The lawn out front stayed trimmed, as though a mower had passed recently. New timber buttressed the veranda stairs. A gleaming, unweathered lock secured the entrance. Mrs. Poole's key turned effortlessly, as if fresh from daily use. That alone should have driven me away. But I crossed the threshold. Inside the entry hall, the atmosphere hung cool and musty. A lengthy desk lined with pigeonholes for correspondence hugged one side. Stairs ascended centrally, forking at a midpoint to veer toward the floors above on both sides. Faded rose motif paper curled loose along the edges from walls that could belong to any century-old flophouse, save for the odor. Beneath the must of aged timber lurked a subtle, acrid bite I knew from my professional prep. Bleach. "Hello?" I ventured. "Just here for upkeep. Anybody around?" Silence greeted me, heavy and oppressive rather than vacant. I scanned the ground level in short order. A lounge with drooping seats. A communal eating area boasting extended benches and tables. The rear galley proved oddly spotless, surfaces scoured, no silken webs in the nooks. Clearly, occupation persisted here, though not in the manner of a cozy inn. From the galley extended a slim corridor probing the house's rear. As I traversed it, the portals flanking me revealed unwelcome truths. Each bore external securing mechanisms, bolts, latches, reinforced fittings for chains, none meant for inward access. Several sported multiples. The surrounding frames bore deep scratches and dents, suggesting frantic blows or thrusts from within. My pulse quickened, breath catching. I eased open the initial one, bracing for an outburst. The chamber measured tiny, just room for a steel frame fastened to the ground and a pail nearby. Windowless, barren of any comforts, crafted to confine a captive, not accommodate a visitor. The adjacent space mirrored it, and the one beyond. By the fourth portal, tremors gripped my fingers, nearly sending the keys clattering. There, near the frame, faint impressions of digits marred the plaster. 4 long scratches trailed downward across the peeling paint, exposing the raw plaster beneath. I tallied the marks. They were far too narrow for an adult man's hands. For a moment, I nearly spun on my heel, headed back to my vehicle, and sped off to the sheriff's department. But a final door loomed at the hallway's far end, bulkier than the rest, featuring a peephole slot at eye height reminiscent of a vintage film. Its padlock dangled unlocked, the U-shaped bar leaning idly against the frame. I'm not sure what compelled me to reach for it. Perhaps intrigue, routine, or a nagging duty to uncover whatever lay beyond. My hand gripped the chilled steel. The atmosphere seeping from the opposite side seemed altered, chillier where it brushed my exposed wrist. The space inside was bigger, yet offered no solace. Several chains were secured to the concrete floor, each terminating in a cuff that seemed to point fingers of blame. A single naked bulb dangled overhead, dark and lifeless. Flipping the wall switch ignited it with a hesitant glow and a low hum. The walls bore discolored patches I preferred not to examine closely. Against one side, a rickety metal table held a basic burner phone next to a pile of buff envelopes. The device's display glowed at my touch, no lock required. The most recent texts remained displayed. EDA 2Rs dropped same place as last time. Keep them put. No marks. Payment cleared. Nausea hit me like a punch. I sifted through the files. They contained duplicated identification cards, admission sheets with fabricated identities but authentic birth dates, hasty jottings noting the absence of regional connections. Picked up at bus station. Does not speak English. This wasn't some relic of past wrongdoing. It was a functioning setup, systematic, structured, operating out of a property I'd entered, using keys handed over by a lady who believed her vacant structure was just that. I missed the sound of the car arriving out front. The crunch of tires on the drive didn't click until a door banged shut overhead. A male voice echoed along the corridor, conversing with an unseen party. I killed the lights and flattened against the wall, my pulse pounding painfully in my chest. Footfalls echoed through the entrance area. A second pair trailed behind. Probably 2 guys. Jangling keys. A bolt clicked. They headed further in, past the kitchen, straight into my corridor. In a frantic instant, I considered ducking beneath a bunk bed. Holding out, until they breach the door. And then, confront them both? Bluff my escape. Visions of news stories flooded my mind, along with the faces in those documents driving home the truth. If they discovered my intrusion, if they realized I'd witnessed this nightmare, I'd never leave alive. At the room's rear, a narrow window near the ceiling was partially obscured by paint. The pane was fractured but whole. I pulled a cot beneath it, its frame scraping harshly across the ground as I scaled it. Each sound rang out like a shout in the silence, yet the steps above didn't falter. With my elbow, I shattered the remaining shards and wriggled out, gashing my legs and palms on the edges. I hit the ground outside amid soggy foliage, the forest's scent washing over me like redemption. Belly crawling parallel to the building's exterior until I hit the tree line, I then bolted away without a backward glance. From the nearest filling station, bustling with customers, I dialed emergency services. The operator's tone shifted from disinterested to urgent the instant I recited the location. She instructed me to remain on site. Patrol units were nearby, she assured me. They'd been hunting that building for months. Afterward, details emerged through media reports and offhand comments from the investigator during my interview. That evening, they stormed the lodging, uncovered 3 captives in the lower-level chambers, traced signs of countless others who'd cycled through and disappeared, collared 2 suspects right there, and devoted the following year to dismantling the broader syndicate. In a subdued exchange, one officer confided that arriving an hour later would have found the cells occupied. An hour sooner, and the traces might have faded, letting the site linger as mere hearsay. Mrs. Poole passed away before the court case concluded. She remained oblivious to how her father's legacy had twisted, to the atrocities unfolding in the quarters she'd imagined hosting tenants and family dinners. I sorted through her remaining documents. The keys, however, I retained, not as a memento, but as evidence that the darkest atrocities aren't always forsaken. Often they persist in operation, lurking beyond new security and neat facades, legally held by folks who would shatter upon learning the reality. Folks now inquire why abandoned places don't unnerve me. I reply, I've explored a site that required no phantoms. I've navigated corridors designed to trap cries. If mountain shades exist, they could simply be the lingering voices of those who encountered operators like the pair in that flophouse and never unlocked a door to exit freely. Folks up in the hills prefer to handle their affairs discreetly, yet the ground remembers secrets long after folks choose to forget. Property records endure beyond rumors. Rocks survive even after names fade. That's the thought I clung to when the mail arrived announcing the death of the final relative from my dad's line. Suddenly, I was the owner of land in a hollow I'd only known through hushed family spats. I'm Rowan, and I had zero interest in any legacy. The packet was hefty, packed with lawyerly jargon I barely glanced at, and ancient papers that baffled me. The key detail was straightforward. A dwelling nestled in a gap between twin slopes, a handful of wooded acres plus a stream, and my signature on documents declaring it mine. The lawyer on the line described it as a rare chance. My mom dismissed it as your old man's kin rising from the grave to torment us. She clammed up after that, only mentioning how her ex-husband's folks had erected the place with their own hands, how some dark event unfolded there while she carried me, and how she'd sworn off, returning once she ditched him. My probes bounced off her like water on metal roofing. "Get rid of it," she urged at last, gaze fixed on the window over the sink rather than me. "Ditch it fast and steer clear of their specters." Had she offered a real explanation, I might have heeded her. But that familiar defiant edge in her tone echoed my own, and I pondered sagging ceilings and clogged plumbing in a place untouched for decades. I convinced myself it was sensible to head there for a couple of days, assess the situation firsthand before phoning an agent. The journey to the hollow stretched out far more than the atlas suggested. The path squeezed down to a single track, then barely that. Loose stones and hard-packed earth twisted amid dense walls of foliage arching overhead. My navigator quit about midway. For the final stretch, I relied on the plot diagram from the solicitor, tallying bends and side paths until spotting the correct hidden fork, pair of shallow grooves vanishing into the brush. The structure at the lane's conclusion surprised me completely. I'd imagined a majestic ruin, all steep roofs and ornate edges, a classic spooky manner to fit my mom's ominous tone. But it was plain. A straightforward two-level rectangle with weathered gray coating peeling to raw timber. The veranda dipped slightly, yet held firm. The rooftop seemed solid. A single pane out front was sealed from within with plywood. The rest gazed over the open space, panes whole but fogged. For an instant, keys gripped in my fist as I stood there. I dared to believe it'd be straightforward. A bit of tidying, minor fixes, an ad on the web, and I'd sever this final link to the silent side of my lineage. The entry swung inward more smoothly than anticipated, the lock yielding effortlessly. A wave of odor escaped, stale particles, aged lumber, and an elusive tang I couldn't pinpoint, subtle yet biting, like the atmosphere in a space freshly abandoned. The interior struck me as eerily orderly, no toppled pieces, no scrawls, no traces of critters burrowing. In the sitting area, a sofa waited under a drape, the outline of seats discernible below. Shelves displayed lines of sturdy volumes, bindings worn but free of rot. The dining surface bore 4 seats aligned neatly, one nudged forward as though its occupant had risen moments ago. Surfaces gleamed empty. The basin sat bone dry. What unsettled me wasn't the presence of things, but their absence. No belongings, no snapshots lining the walls, no coats dangling, no fridge decorations, no hints of daily existence, just a meticulously stripped shell of domesticity, as if a theater backdrop awaited its performers. In the passage near the staircase dangled one item, an encased sheet of ruled stationery, the writing dimmed yet readable. At the summit, in script I knew from Dad's ancient correspondence, a phrase repeated thrice. "This house is ours. This house is ours. This house is ours." Below, in another script, each was slashed once and supplanted in tinier print. "We are the house." I chalked it up to petty kin squabbles, some odd dispute over title etched permanently. Even so, my hands tingled with the urge to yank the frame loose and tuck it away sight unseen. I resisted and climbed to the upper level. The corridor above featured a series of portals, all ajar. Sleeping quarters, largely vacant save for shrouded beds, empty side tables, nude cabinets, no garments stowed, no footwear tucked away. Their uniformity blurred my recall of which I'd inspected. I'd enter one, scan briefly, emerge, and momentarily confuse the facing entry for the one I'd exited. After the third or fourth, a dull throb pulsed at my temples. I blamed the grit in the air. I blamed the road fatigue. I pressed on through the corridor. At its end stood a door that stood out from the rest, an aged knob with a keyhole below it. None of the keys on my ring worked. The handle gave way smoothly under my grip, yet the door refused to yield, as though some weighty object blocked it from the inside. I shoved with more force. The wood groaned in protest but held firm. "All right," I grumbled under my breath. "Keep your mysteries." I pivoted to retreat down the passage and halted, pulse quickening. Something felt off, though I couldn't pinpoint it. The hall appeared unchanged, doors lining both sides, a window distant at the far wall. Then nausea hit me. A new image hung on the wall, one that hadn't been there moments before. A black and white photo in a pristine frame, glass spotless of dust. 4 figures posed before the house, a man, a woman, and 2 children. The man's sharp jaw mirrored my own too closely for chance. The woman was my mother in her youth, locks flowing longer. Her expression was somber. The boy wedged between the adults resembled me at around 8, glaring at the lens. The little girl kneeling nearby was a stranger, barely out of infancy. I gaped, breath catching in my tightening throat. "I have no sibling. I'm an only child." Nothing like this exists in my mother's collections. I edged nearer. The more I studied it, the more unnatural it seemed. The backdrop matched this very house, this veranda, those trees at that precise slant. My father's arm encircled a woman who'd vowed to me she'd never tread this ground. My young face angled toward a girl with indistinct eyes, the shot's sharpness blurring there as if deliberately smeared on the film, right behind me. A floorboard near the sealed door groaned. I whirled. The door remained shut, but now a key, absent earlier, protruded from the lock. Antique brass gleamed faintly in the muted light spilling from the hallway window. Every fiber of my being urged me to ignore it. Still, I reached out. My hand grasped the chilled metal and twisted. The door eased open into a compact space without windows. Dimness prevailed, fed only by the corridor's spillover. There, a slim bed, a bureau, a pint-sized seat. Childish sketches clung to the walls at eye level for a kid, stirring in the breeze from the entry. Dwellings, foliage, simple figures of people and kin. In each scene, one outline lingered apart from the home, shaded deeper, elongated and isolated. Arrayed on the bureau were journals in uniform blue bindings, years inscribed along their edges in my father's unmistakable script. My name appeared beneath his on the final volume. I hesitated to handle them, yet I snatched the uppermost one and leafed to a random section. The page that caught my gaze bore a date from the year my mother abandoned him. Quote 123, it stated. Quote 124. The following words were slashed through with such force the paper ripped. My sight blurred. I set the book aside and withdrew from the chamber, fingers gripping the knob. As I drew the door closed, my image flickered in the protective cover of one sketch's holder. Briefly, A second form loomed just behind me in that distorted mirror, elongated, head cocked at an impossible angle, as if eavesdropping. I retreated to the hallway and abruptly, every light extinguished. I hadn't activated them. I hadn't spotted any controls. But the passage sank into pitch blackness, pierced solely by a weak radiance from below. Homes carry their unique creaks and sighs. This one seemed to breathe beside me, timbers contracting, an unseen presence rustling at sound's edge. I lost my bearings for the staircase. The flanking doors pressed nearer, the walls as if encroaching. Underscore, quote underscore 125 underscore. I voiced firmly, uncertain of my audience. Quote 126, pressure built in my ears, like submersion in depths. Then, as swiftly as they'd vanished, the bulbs reignited. The corridor reverted to its initial state from my ascent. No picture, no inserted key. The sketch's enclosure with the scribbled note had returned to its downstairs spot in my mind. I avoided re-entering the barred space. I didn't hunt for the image. Instead, I descended the steps, exited through the main entrance, and avoided glancing rearward. From the grounds, the building resumed its mundane facade, a neglected edifice in an overlooked hollow. A passerby in a vehicle wouldn't sense any anomaly. That realization chilled me deepest. I offloaded the estate via the attorney without revisiting. I accepted a fraction of its value just to erase it from my records quickly. When the buyers inquired about tales or warnings tied to the site, I mentioned only that the roof held steady and the well-required water analysis. Nothing more. These days, in my modest flat across state lines, I jolt awake occasionally with the sensation of an endless corridor unfurling ahead, impossibly extended. Flanking portals, one terminal with a freshly placed key in its mechanism. I've begun noticing items affixed to my walls that I swear I never mounted. A tilted snapshot, a frame I could have sworn I stowed away. According to the deed, that house no longer belongs to me. The documents declare it another person's burden now. Yet, whenever I shut my eyes, those words appear repeatedly, scrawled in my father's handwriting. Below them, the note. We are the house. I once believed it signified they'd invested too much of their essence in its construction. These days, I fear it implies a darker truth. Structures like that don't merely provide refuge for inhabitants. They observe them closely. They rehearse ways to contain them. And though you might leave it all behind, a fragment of yourself lingers within the walls, attuned and patient, ready to inscribe the following name along the edge of a blue notebook abandoned on a bureau in a chamber that defies reason.